Hey guys, it's Allie. Welcome back to Bite-Sized Book of Mormon. I'm glad to have you with me. So if you've never been here before, this is just a podcast where I read through one chapter of the Book of Mormon each episode, and I give a little bit of context, a little bit of insight, a little bit of good times, so stick around. So if you remember last episode, we read Alma chapter 48, which is basically a fanboy chapter for Captain Moroni from Mormon, because again, Mormon is the one that's adapting this record into the Book of Mormon, and so he's going through and reading the stories of Captain Moroni, and he's like, holy crap, this guy's awesome. And so he just kind of talks Captain Moroni up the whole time, and it's an awesome, awesome chapter, so go back and listen to that if you haven't already. But yeah, I think let's continue the war chapters with Alma chapter 49. And it came to pass in the 11th month of the 19th year, on the 10th day of the month, the armies of the Lamanites were seen approaching towards the land of Amalickiah. And behold, the city had been rebuilt, and Moroni had stationed an army by the borders of the city, and they had cast up dirt round about to shield them from the arrows and the stones of the Lamanites. For behold, they fought with stones and arrows. Behold, I said that the city of Amalickiah had been rebuilt. I say unto you, yea, that it was in part rebuilt, and because the Lamanites had destroyed it once, because of the iniquity of the people, they supposed that it would again become an easy prey for them. But behold, how great was their disappointment! For behold, the Nephites had dug up a ridge of earth round about them, which was so high that the Lamanites could not cast their stones and their arrows at them, that they might take effect, neither could they come upon them, save it was by their place of entrance. Now at this time the chief captains of the Lamanites were astonished exceedingly, because of the wisdom of the Nephites in preparing their places of security. Now the leaders of the Lamanites had supposed, because of the greatness of their numbers, yea, they supposed that they should be privileged to come upon them as they had hitherto done, yea, and they had also prepared themselves with shields and with breastplates, and they had also prepared themselves with garments of skins, yea, very thick garments to cover their nakedness. So things are developing. Last chapter, we read about how Amalickiah was preparing the Lamanites to battle, and so was Captain Moroni. They did it in very different ways. And now this chapter begins with Amalickiah actually marching on the Nephites. But the place that they march is very interestingly chosen. They choose to march on Amalickiah, which if you remember way back, I think even in early Alma, that was a Nephite city that was full of people that were really, really wicked. And this is actually the city that Alma the Younger met Amulek in. And they preached together in that city. And even though it was eventually destroyed because they kicked out all the believers, and so everyone else left in that city was wicked, and so God destroyed it, even though that city was destroyed, Captain Moroni and the Nephites rebuilt that city. And the Lamanites attacked it partially because they're like, oh, this will be easy prey. We were able to destroy it easily before. And so we'll attack this first, kind of to get our foot in the door. But little did they realize that Captain Moroni has that kind of foresight to realize, hey, this was previously one of our weakest spots, but we can turn it into one of our strongest, one of our most fortified, one of our most secure. To me, this is a very, very Ether 1227 moment. Weak things have become strong, right? And I love that, you know? I think that the fortification of Nephite cities can definitely be a little bit of an allegory for our own spiritual preparedness. The places where we were once the weakest, where Satan once had hold, can very easily, through the power of Jesus Christ, become the strongest parts of ourselves. And I think that is really, really cool. And also we learned that the Lamanites are wearing armor. What a surprise! If you remember in previous chapters, there was a point where the Nephites were all decked out in, chest plates and head plates, etc., all this armor, and the Lamanites were naked except for a loincloth. So it seems that the Lamanites learned their lesson. Either that, or this is the effect of having a Nephite general at their head. Because again, if you remember, the king of the Lamanites now used to be a Nephite, and so he knows where they're coming from, he knows their strategies. And so maybe it's because the Lamanites as a whole learned from their mistakes, or it's because there is a Nephite king on the throne, or realistically it's probably a bit of both. But anyways, it's kind of fun to see the Lamanites respond to their previous mistakes in previous chapters. It makes the stories feel a little bit more alive, Like the Lamanites aren't just the same army every single time, fighting the same battles in the same way. They change it up. They learn from their mistakes. They aren't completely consistent, And neither is Satan. Satan doesn't try the same thing again and again against you. He varies, he learns from how you respond to his temptations, and he evolves, which I think is pretty neat. Anyways, let's go on to see how this battle goes. And being thus prepared, they supposed that they should easily overpower and subject their brethren to the yoke of bondage, or slay and massacre them according to their pleasure. But behold, to their uttermost astonishment, they were prepared for them, in a manner which never had been known among the children of Lehi. Now they were prepared for the Lamanites to battle after the manner of the instructions of Moroni. And it came to pass that the Lamanites, or the Amalickiahites, were exceedingly astonished at their manner of preparation for war. Now, if King Amalickiah had come down out of the land of Nephi at the head of his army, perhaps he would have caused the Lamanites to have attacked the Nephites at the city of Amalickiah. For behold, he did care not for the blood of his people. But behold, Amalickiah did not come down himself to battle, and behold, his chief captains durst not attack the Nephites at the city of Amalickiah, for Moroni had altered the management of affairs among the Nephites, insomuch that the Lamanites were disappointed in their places of retreat, and they could not come upon them. Therefore they retreated into the wilderness, and took their camp and marched towards the land of Noah, supposing that to be the next best place for them to come against the Nephites. So basically, the Lamanites don't even attack Amalickiah. They see all these fortifications and they go, oh, this is not going to go well, and they leave. But it's interesting that it says in verse 10 and 11 that if Amalickiah himself were at the head of his armies, he would have still attacked Amalickiah because, and it says very specifically, he did not care for the blood of his people. He didn't care if he had to throw a bunch of bodies at a wall for them to take a city. He didn't care about the loss of life in his armies as long as it got him what he wanted. So it is very lucky then for the Lamanite army that he wasn't there, and that the generals over those armies that were there decided that it might be better to not attack there. So I just think it's interesting that it makes sure to specify that Amalickiah didn't care about his people. He clearly only cares about power and about conquering. And I think that says a lot about Satan as well. He doesn't care about the people he tempts so long as they are tempted. He doesn't care about what happens to the people he tempts. He just wants them conquered in a way. Anyways, very interesting. But yeah, now let's see how they fare against the city of Noah, which is their next order of business to attack. For they knew not that Moroni had fortified or had built forts of security for every city in all the land round about. Therefore, they marched forward to the land of Noah with a firm determination. Yea, their chief captains came forward and took an oath that they would destroy the people of that city. But behold, to their astonishment, the city of Noah, which had hitherto been a weak place, had now, by the means of Moroni, become strong, yea, even to exceed the strength of the city of Amalickiah. And now behold, this was wisdom in Moroni, for he had supposed that they would be frightened at the city of Amalickiah, and as the city of Noah had hitherto been the weakest part of the land, therefore they would march thither to battle, and thus it was according to his desires. So, the Lamanites aren't going to fare very well at the city of Noah, unfortunately. It has in fact been fortified. And I love how it specifies in verse 14, the city of Noah, which had hitherto been a weak place, had now, by the means of Moroni, become strong. So you know how I mentioned Ether 12:27 earlier, weak things becoming strong? That verse is basically Ether 12:27, just with a different context. Like, isn't that awesome? Moroni is Ether 12:27ing all the weakest parts of the Nephite land. But see, this is very unfortunate for the Lamanites, because you'd think, oh, they get to Noah, they turn around again because they can't attack it because it's too well fortified. But, you see, at the end of verse 13, the generals of the Lamanite army are so confident that they're going to take Noah, that they make an oath to their people that they will destroy that city. And so now, they're kind of tied to this oath that they made in front of their own armies to destroy the city. And their honor is kind of on the line here, which is hilarious. That is the most self-sabotaging oath that I have ever seen in the entirety of scripture. Good luck, I guess. Oh my goodness. And behold, Moroni had appointed Lehi to be chief captain over the men of that city. And it was the same Lehi who fought with the Lamanites in the valley on the east of the river Sidon. And now behold, it came to pass that when the Lamanites had found that Lehi commanded the city, they were again disappointed, for they feared Lehi exceedingly. Nevertheless, their chief captains had sworn with an oath to attack the city, therefore they brought up their armies. Now behold, the Lamanites could not get into their forts of security by any other way save by the entrance, because of the highness of the bank which had been thrown up, and the depth of the ditch which had been dug round about, save it were by the entrance. And thus were the Nephites prepared to destroy all such as should attempt to climb up or enter the fort by any other way, by casting over stones and arrows at them. Thus they were prepared, yea, a body of their strongest men, with their swords and their slings, to smite down all who should attempt to come into their place of security by the place of entrance. And thus were they prepared to defend themselves against the Lamanites. So something that I want to note here, if we're going to continue with the allegory of the different cities of the Nephites kind of being us as people, and the fortifications of those cities being our spiritual preparedness, then I think it says a lot that the Nephites here don't just have a wall. They don't just have an army. They have everything. that Moroni could figure out. They have walls, they have ditches, they have armies, they have forts of security, they have everything. And so, when it comes to defending ourselves against Satan, or as you could say, our own personal armies of the Lamanites, don't just do one thing. Don't just rely on one avenue to fight off temptations like that. Having multiple makes it so much easier for you to stand high on your mountain and keep your standards the way that you want to. It makes it so much easier for you to remember who you are when it comes to times where otherwise it would be easy to flake off and do something else. So don't just rely on your own willpower. That's not what the Nephites did. They didn't just build a wall. They didn't just station their army in that city. They did everything they could possibly do to make that city as impregnable as possible. And so I think that says something about how we should go about defending ourselves as well. And it came to pass that the captains of the Lamanites brought up their armies before the place of entrance and began to contend with the Nephites to get into their place of security. But behold, they were driven back from time to time, insomuch that they were slain with an immense slaughter. Now, when they found that they could not obtain power over the Nephites by the pass, they began to dig down their banks of earth that they might obtain a pass to their armies, that they might have an equal chance to fight. But behold, in these attempts they were swept off by the stones and arrows which were thrown at them, and instead of filling up their ditches by pulling down the banks of earth, they were filled up in a measure with their dead and wounded bodies. Thus the Nephites had all power over their enemies, and thus the Lamanites did attempt to destroy the Nephites until their chief captains were all slain. Yea, and more than 1,000 of the Lamanites were slain, while, on the other hand, there was not a single soul of the Nephites which was slain. There were about 50 who were wounded, who had been exposed to the arrows of the Lamanites through the pass, but they were shielded by their shields and their breastplates and their headplates, insomuch that their wounds were upon their legs, many of which were very severe. And it came to pass that when the Lamanites saw that their chief captains were all slain, they fled into the wilderness. And it came to pass that they returned to the land of Nephi to inform their king, Amalickiah, who was a Nephite by birth, concerning their great loss. And it came to pass that he was exceedingly angry with his people, because he had not obtained his desire over the Nephites. He had not subjected them to the yoke of bondage. So, by a raise of hands, who was surprised by the fact that Amalickiah is mad that he failed? I am personally one of those people who was so unsurprised by Amalickiah's response to all of this. Because if you remember earlier, it was literally written that Amalickiah, should he have been there at Amalickiah, he would have attacked that first city. And he would have killed a lot of his people, but they might have succeeded. But he wasn't there, and even though they still did attack the city of Noah was more well fortified than Amalickiah was, and they all died. Or at least the chief captains all died, and everyone else fled because holy crap. Like, if you're all dying off at such a great rate and you have no leadership, what else would you do, right? But it's very interesting that one of the strategies that the Lamanites tried was to kind of break down the wall that the Nephites made out of dirt and fill the ditch with that dirt so they can cross and they can more easily access the Nephites. And if you remember what I was talking about earlier, this would have succeeded had the Nephites only built the wall. If that was the only thing they had, they would have succeeded, the Lamanites would have gotten the upper hand, and they might have even won the battle. But because they had a wall and a ditch and an army with a bunch of stones and arrows in hand, they didn't succeed. Because even though they were trying to break down one of their defenses, they couldn't defend against a different one of their defenses, i.e. the stones and arrows raining from above. So anyways, that just goes to show the power of a multifaceted defense against the Lamanites, or you could say against the temptations of Satan. So, anyways, it's very cool to see how this turned out. I mean, we're not surprised that the Lamanites lost because Captain Moroni is in charge and he's the coolest, but still, I think it's really interesting and very important to note the way in which they won. They didn't just win, they won because of certain things, and they won because they had so much preparedness. And Captain Moroni specifically focused on the weakest areas of the Nephites to strengthen them the most, and that paid off in dividends for these people. Yea, he was exceedingly wroth, and he did curse God and also Moroni, swearing with an oath that he would drink his blood, and this because Moroni had kept the commandments of God in preparing for the safety of the people. And it came to pass that, on the other hand, the people of Nephi did thank the Lord their God because of his matchless power in delivering them from the hands of their enemies. And thus ended the 19th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi. Yea, and there was continual peace among them, and exceedingly great prosperity in the church because of their heed and diligence which they gave unto the word of God, which was declared unto them by Helaman, and Shiblon, and Corianton, and Ammon, and his brethren, yea, and by all those who had been ordained by the holy order of God, being baptized unto repentance and sent forth to preach among the people. I absolutely love when Mormon places the actions of Amalickiah as the perfect opposite to the actions of Captain Moroni. He did something very similar in the previous chapter, but he does it here too. In verse 27, it talks about Amalickiah where he says, "And he did curse God and also Moroni, swearing with an oath that he would drink his blood." So Amalickiah's not having a great time, right? Very angry, cursing God, all that. And then literally the very next verse, it says about Moroni, "The people of Nephi did thank the Lord their God because of his matchless power." So, Amalickiah is cursing God, the people of Nephi, and presumably also Captain Moroni, are thanking God. Isn't that awesome? I love this parallelism that it's drawing between Amalickiah and Captain Moroni. It really highlights how they're polar opposites. So for the last 3 chapters, we've been hearing about Amalickiah, but he hasn't actually flexed his military might yet. And so this was kind of the other shoe falling, right? This is finally when he attacks the Nephites, and finally when Amalickiah realizes that his strategies are flawed, mostly just because he's going against Captain Moroni, and you really can't beat Captain Moroni. I'm sorry. Like, you just can't. So yeah, very interesting first face-off between these 2 very famous people in the war chapters, and clearly we know in which way it went, right? Captain Moroni and his foresight and his focus on the Lord and his focus on multifaceted defenses really carried him through in this chapter, and again, that teaches us a lot about how we defend ourselves. So, very, very cool chapter. So the standout verse for this chapter is going to be verse 14, which says, "But behold, to their astonishment, the city of Noah, which had hitherto been a weak place, had now, by the means of Moroni, become strong, yea, even to exceed the strength of the city of Amalickiah." I've already mentioned this verse and how it relates to a previous verse in the chapter, but like, dude, this is such an Ether 1227 moment, and I absolutely love that, because it talks about both the merit of physical defensive preparation that Moroni's doing, but also the spiritual preparation in the way that it parallels so closely with Ether 1227. Because obviously what this verse is literally talking about, the weak and the strong, is in the level of fortification that this city had. It used to be very weakly fortified, now it's very strongly fortified. But there's obvious parallels, not only to Ether 1227, but just also to, again, an analogy for us being attacked by Satan in general. I think it's a very, very clear parallel to draw. So not only is this verse very Ether 1227 coded, you could say, but it also, once again, as is a theme with Captain Moroni, balances faith and works. When it says weak and strong, it's talking about literal works that Captain Moroni did. He fortified the cities, but at the same time, the words weak and strong can also mean spiritually weak and strong. And knowing Moroni, he definitely worked on that in that city and made sure that those people in that city were strong in the gospel. So anyways, good stuff. This is such a neat chapter and a pleasure to read. Definitely a good start to the war chapters. But yeah, that was the episode for today. I hope you enjoyed. I definitely did. I love a good analogy, and that was kind of this entire chapter. So there you go. But yeah, there's just a few links down in the show notes if you want to go ahead and check those out. The first one is just a quick let me know what you learned link. So if you want to shoot me a message and chat about something Book of Mormon related, you can go ahead and do that there. Or alternatively, you can DM me on Instagram. Either way. Next, there are some links to access a digital copy of the Book of Mormon. So if you don't have your own copy, but you want to read along or you want to find a chapter to read, you can go ahead and click those down there. Next, there's a quick support the show link. So if you want to shoot me a few dollars and support what I do as an independent podcast creator, that would be greatly appreciated. Next, we are on YouTube. So if you want to access the podcast on that platform, you can go ahead and subscribe to that YouTube channel. Every once in a while, I do trivia. Not very common, but it is there. And finally, we are on Instagram, so if you want to go follow me where I'm the most active, go ahead and follow me there. You will find standout verses and episode clips and trivia, and an all-around good time. So yeah, I'll see you there. But yeah, with that, I'll talk to you later. Bye.